it's Sean at Mike, brew-dudes.com, and we learned that Mike's beer lines were all funky. He cleaned them so that we could taste this week his Pilsner. He said, well, the lines are clean, right? So,
we cleaned the lines. Yes, I cleaned the lines.
We cleaned the lines. So, but did we fix the beer?
You tell me.
Is that the spoiler alert?
I think no. I think the beer is not fixed. I think well, it's not as clean and crisp as our Pilsner should be.
Okay. So I think what we're going to do is you're going to take us through the recipe, the steps you took to brew this beer, and then
set expectations.
Yes, let's set expectations, and then let's find out what you think went wrong, so we all can learn a little bit from this particular home brew experience. I'm going to start tasting it right now, and you can take us through the recipe.
Yeah. So super easy recipe. What I was going for is something sort of German Pilsner-esque, not super bitter aggressive, but I just wanted a crisp lager. So this builds off of that Munich Dunkel that we did, that I did. And I want to just have rather than having a dark lager, have a nice crisp yellow lager to go with it. And this is sort of a German Pils inspired beer, and you'll get the drift as I go through the recipe. So it's 10 pounds of Pilsner malt, Weyermann Pilsner malt. It's 2 pounds of Vienna. I just wanted to put a little edge of Vienna in there, a little complexity to it. And then it's 15 grams, so basically half an ounce of Warrior for 60 minutes, just to give it some bittering. And then it's 2 full ounces of Hallertau Mittelfuhr at 10 minutes to go, just so you get that Mittelfuhr spiciness. Just that to me is an attempt to just give it that German-esque character when you're drinking it. And this is a repitch of the Saflager S189 that came from that Dunkel beer that I did.
Yeah.
So mashed at 148, fermented it at, at the time, it was nice and cool out in the garage still, so fermented at like 58, whatever, and then I ramp it up towards the end. It did sit a little longer than I probably would have let it in the fermenter, but whatever. Kegged it, put it on. When I tasted the hydrometer sample, it had a little bit of like a sweetness that I attributed to just like that Pilsner, really clean Pilsner taste to it. And maybe there's a little bit of interplay of that Vienna sort of faking me out, thinking it was a little bit sweet. But then after I got it on the keg, that's in hooked up to the draft system, that's when over a little bit of time, I sort of got this flavor profile. I'm not going to put words to it yet. I want you to tell me what you think it tastes like. But it just wasn't perfect, and that's why then I said, I got to clean these beer lines. But I think it was on the beer lines too long, because basically what happened is if you've got contaminated beer lines or even a contaminated faucet, the growth, the microbial growth is going to keep going down the line, and it will go to the keg as well. Right? It doesn't just stay put. It goes and goes and goes until it contaminates the beer too. So I don't think it's super contaminated, but you tell me what it tastes like, and then I'll give you my impressions of what I think it tastes like.
Well, I think that it's interesting with the use of Warrior hops, because I think the hop profile is dead on. I think that I really like, the bitterness, the clean bitterness. The Warrior I don't think necessarily has. I mean, I would say using a Magnum, but I think the Warrior expresses itself really nicely in this beer, along with the Hallertauer. I mean, it's great. The malt profile is where the problem is, and that's where it does taste a little bit more like there's like hints of Hefe, like a hefeweizen in this, and it's subtle. It's not hitting you over the head like this is a contaminated beer, but like you said, it doesn't finish crisp. Like right in the front of the flavor, you get this kind of a little bubble gum, a little hefeweizen flavor, and that's the disappointment here, because I think if the malt profile or without this funkiness, I think that you'd have a really nice beer here. Because when I brew Pilsners, what I don't seem to get right is the hop profile. I taste commercial beers, and they have that. It's like a very strong, like a bitterness, but it's not overwhelming, and it's a spicy bitterness. And it's like, if I could only somehow replicate this in my beer. So I might take a few tips from you to that 60-minute addition.
Which reminds me too, from the hop stand profile, the hop situation. I forgot to mention, it just dawned on me when you brought that up, because we've talked about this off camera a lot in the past of hitting the hop profile. So this is our tap water, but diluted by about 60% with distilled water.
Yes. Yeah.
So I cut our tap water with distilled water and then added back in some gypsum and some calcium chloride too at the same time. So I think that's working here.
Yeah, I agree.
That part's working.
And I think that's another tip for my own brewing.
The hop profile, there's a spicy middle through lingering in my palate still.
Yeah, yeah.
And to me, that's like Pilsner.
Yep, and like I was saying, that's a tip for me as well, that from the water profile, which I have done that, but I think for me, even adding any of our tap water to a Pilsner or a lager that I'm making, I think I'm going to start with distilled and then build it up from what it needs to be with water.
Yeah, for us, when the beers get lighter and lighter in color, and I've struggled to replicate really great cream ales, and I think because I just sort of don't time it right, so I don't get to the store and buy distilled water. I'm using tap water. The lighter colored beers, I think, just come out a little flabby.
Yeah.
But I don't want to turn this into a water chemistry conversation.
No, as it always, all roads.
And that's what people love and want to hear about too.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what do you think happens to this beer?
So it's one of two things.
Okay.
I think for me, when it was first pouring, I even really thought it was a little bit saison-y, like farmhousey.
Yeah.
But there definitely was a distinct hefeweizen quality to it. There was a yeast bite to it. I don't necessarily get the bubblegum. Well, when it was a little bit, when it presented a little bit more sweeter, which when you tried it over the weekend, maybe it was still a little sweeter. It seemed to be, to me, I really got more of that heffy clove thing. Yeah. Really more of the heffy yeast thing going on.
Yeah, it's on the nose too.
And it's on the nose.
Yeah.
So that's what I get. I think it's I'll nail it down to three things.
Okay.
First and foremost, it could very well have happened during open transfer, pitching on the yeast cake, which I don't do a whole lot. And maybe that day was a little breezier than it should have been, or maybe I was being rushed or whatever. But I also remember too, I don't want the whole yeast cake. And rather than harvest out of the brew bucket, I pour out some of the yeast. So maybe I slopped around. Maybe I got an airborne contaminant in there. Maybe that's where I picked up the contaminant, but it didn't taste that way at the time.
Yeah.
But it was pretty sweet, despite the gravity on this is like 1009, right? So that fermentation profile was great.
Yep.
So the other thing is my beer lines may have been contaminated and crept itself back into the keg because I didn't take action once I noticed that the lines were contaminated. So that's the main thing is if you don't have a routine, you should be cleaning your beer lines every 2 weeks, which I definitely don't do. You got to clean your beer lines every 2 weeks. If you don't take action, this can happen. The other thing too is, while it's cool to have a kegerator with faucets on it, and we just did a video not too long ago installing a faucet, what notice is when it's like this, when it's really warm, if you don't have full climate control where your kegerator is, the faucets themselves sweat.
Yeah.
They carry, there's a chill and they sweat, and when they sweat, then you can get mold and growth on the outside of the faucet and the inside of the faucet, and it's really hard to combat that. So I know, side note, new kegerator for me, I'm probably not going to do faucets anymore outside like that, because that's how it's a combination of old beer in the lines creating contamination, because all homebrew is contaminated. It's just that you probably drink it before you really notice it. But if they sit in lines long enough, then you've got a chance for that to take hold. Or that third thing is there's some contamination at the faucet level working its way in and then going down the lines to the thing. So those are the 3 points of potential contact for contamination. I will say this about the beer, though. It has cleared up significantly since just 2 days ago. Yep. And I think that the taste is not as prominent as it was when I first did it. So
things could be fading away.
Things could be fading away, or maybe what we're just talking about is green beer.
Yeah.
And it's truly lagering now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the yeast is dropping out of it, right? Because it's getting clearer. So I still don't think it's perfect. But before we rolled the camera, I said, let's taste this. We'll do the video, because then I'm going to dunk this thing and move on. But now I'm curious. I'm gonna have to let it sit around for a couple more weeks and just see if it actually is, if it's lagering up a little bit. You know.
So you, at the beginning of the video, you said that you felt like you left the beer in the fermenter for a little bit longer than you would normally would.
Yeah, and temperatures were getting warmer and warmer.
Right. Which, you know, but if that's towards the end, maybe that's a diacetyl rest.
Yeah.
You know, you could see
but
that.
if there is a contaminant in there,
and
getting the temperature up gives it a reason to
grow,
to get even more happy, right?
But how many, like, so, but I think with lagers, and I know that you were doing it out in the garage, certainly maybe, you know, having it in the fridge with a temperature control, you could control the entire fermentation process. But when I do that, my fermentation is real slow. So I was curious when you said, like, I left it in the fermenter a little longer than I thought it would, because my thought is with lagers, it's okay. I mean, things just take much longer.
I think it's okay, but you still have to have started with a great, healthy pitch of yeast.
Sure.
You have to not have any contamination in there. And I think one thing, you know, absolute temperature is not as critical as temperature stability, temperature control, right? Like what more and more people are realizing with some of these lager strains, you can ferment them at, say, 65 degrees and still get a really clean lager. But if you're going 55, 65, you know, up and down, that doesn't, the yeast, that stresses the yeast out and you get some of those off flavors, right? So I think that's, you know, that's the thing. It sat longer than I wanted to out there. Usually, almost all beers I have probably sit in a fermenter for at least 3 weeks, if not a month.
Yeah.
So when I noticed a fermentation issue, meaning like an attenuation issue, then I realized that I probably really had a recipe water chemistry issue. Because if you're going to sit on a yeast cake for a month, it should ferment itself out if it's going to ferment out. But
all right. So what can people take away from this video? What can people learn to not repeat any kind of issue that you're having with this beer?
Beer lines. You got to keep your beer lines clean.
Don't forget to clean
that's what this tastes like.
lines.
You go to a bar, you taste a little bit of Hefe in an IPA or something.
Yeah.
Like some of those beers that are just super hoppy, you probably don't even notice it but in a subtle beer like this, you pick up on that. And so I really probably think it was the beer lines is where it came from.
And that's where the contamination came from. So number one tip from this video, clean everything and your beer lines. If you don't, you know, don't forget your beer lines. You got to clean those too. That reminds me, on that last trip that I took to Maine, got a beer and I didn't send it back. I suffered through it, but I said, this beer line is yuck.
You know, if you've got multiple taps like I do too, if you have multiple faucets, you should not clean one of those lines for a while and push a beer. You know, when we have a new beer, push that beer through there and understand what, you know, put it on a clean line too, and then understand what dirty beer lines taste. Because you'll be surprised when you go to your favorite brewery or brew pub or whatever. You'd be surprised you pick up on dirty beer line taste quite a bit.
I don't. The breweries, I don't pick it up. The brew pubs, absolutely. Yeah. It's like the you know, because you're some guy who goes in, you're like, I'm gonna get a pint of this because it's, you know, weird. Yep. And then you're thoroughly disappointed because that's the line they haven't cleaned.
I always get nervous if I go to a beer bar that's got like 100 plus faucets. 200 beers on tap. Yeah. Because you got to ask, because that's a lot of labor. Cost spent on a lot of places outsource that anyway, but that's a lot to keep those in rotation, keep them all clean. So ask them how often they clean their beer lines, and you'll be.
Yeah, especially when you're like, learn
how to clean beer lines and start a business doing it, right? Because it's all contracted out.
That's true.
Very few places clean their own beer lines.
When I worked in Boston, I saw, you know, vans, and that's all, you know, that's what is it on the side of the van was beer line cleaning. Yep. So those people, you know, I'm sure they went around town and went into bars and did just that. So don't forget to clean your beer lines. We should do a video on that. I'm sure people will be like enthralled, like, wow, that's how you do it? Yeah, it's pretty much like cleaning everything else, right? All right, so that's a big takeaway. I really wanted to brew an Italian Pilsner. That was a recipe in BYO. I had one when I was over in Europe. shoot, 7, 8 years ago now. And then our viewer from Sweden sent over his version of that. And I was like, this is such a good beer.
But you got to get your water right.
I know, get your water right. You got to make sure everything's clean. I mean, every flaw will be picked up. Like, I get a good pitch of yeast, all that stuff. So, all right. So we have our Pilsner plans. Let's execute. Okay. Hey, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Tell your friends if they're into homebrew beer. We do this every week, so it pays to subscribe for free. For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com, brew on.
Cheers.